Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're plugging directly into the brain's hidden power grid. We're going to uncover a revolutionary secret about how your brain cells actually get the fuel they need to think, learn, and remember. Okay, let's just start with a number that's, well, it's kind of mind-boggling. Your brain, which is only about 2% of your body's weight, chews through a whopping 20% of your daily energy. Yeah, you heard that right. It is, by a huge margin, the most energy-hungry organ you've got. And that, right there, creates a massive paradox. How on earth does this tiny 3-pound organ manage such an incredible, outsized energy bill? Well, the answer? It turns out to be way more complex and, honestly, more elegant than we ever imagined. To really get to the bottom of that question, we've got to go back a bit and look at the old established theory. You see, for decades, neuroscience basically ran on what we could call the neurocentric view, which put the neuron at the center of, well, everything. For the longest time, the thinking was super simple. Neurons were seen as these lone wolves. The idea was they just reached out to the nearest blood vessel, grabbed all the glucose they needed, and handled their own energy business. And astrocytes, the other major type of brain cell, they were just seen as, structural glue, basically just holding everything together. But then, in 1994, everything changed. A really radical new hypothesis came out from Pierre Magistretti and Luc Pellerin that just completely flipped that old idea on its head. They proposed that neurons weren't lone wolves at all. In fact, they were locked in a critical, non-negotiable partnership. This new idea, they called it the Astrocyte Neuron Lactate Shuttle, or ANLS for short. It wasn't just a small tweak. No, this was a complete overhaul, a whole new power grid for the brain. It kicked off a decades-long scientific debate and a total revolution in how we see brain metabolism, which, by the way, only got its final proof in the last decade or so. So let's just boil this down. The really crucial point is this. Our thinking has shifted from seeing neurons as these self-sufficient little units to seeing them in an absolutely essential partnership with astrocytes. The astrocyte isn't just glue, it's the brain's power plant. And what's so cool about this new model is this really clear, beautiful division of labor. Think of it like this. Astrocytes are the producers. They're the power plants. They take the raw fuel, which is glucose from the blood, and they refine it into a more efficient energy source called lactate. Then you have the neurons. They're the consumers. They're like the factories that use this refined lactate fuel to power all the intense work of thinking. Okay, so let's get into the nitty-gritty here. How does this incredible shuttle actually work on a molecular level? What's the machinery that really makes this whole partnership tick? Okay, follow me on this because it's a really elegant 6-step loop. It all kicks off when a neuron fires, releasing a neurotransmitter called glutamate. An astrocyte, which is right nearby, swoops in to clean up that glutamate. Now, that cleanup job actually triggers a pump inside the astrocyte that needs energy. So the astrocyte fires up glycolysis, breaks down glucose, and makes lactate. Then it shuttles that lactate right back to the neuron that just fired. It's a perfect system. The neuron's activity literally orders its own fuel delivery on demand. And here's where it gets really clever. It's like evolution hardwired this whole partnership into the cells themselves. Astrocytes have a molecular switch that's permanently stuck in the on position for making lactate. Neurons, on the other hand, do the exact opposite. They actively destroy that same switch, locking their lactate production in the off position. This basically forces the division of labor, making the neuron totally dependent on the astrocyte for fuel. And this just perfectly illustrates the whole source-sink dynamic. The astrocyte power plant uses a transporter called MCT4. You can think of it like a big, wide-open chute for exporting huge amounts of lactate. But the neuron factory has MCT2, which acts more like a super powerful vacuum cleaner, greedily sucking up any lactate it can find. This whole setup guarantees that the fuel flows in only one direction, from producer to consumer. Now, you have to understand, an idea this big, this revolutionary, it wasn't just accepted overnight. No way. In fact, it kicked off one of the most heated and long-running debates in modern neuroscience. It was a real showdown. So for years, you had critics, let's call them Team Glucose, arguing that this whole shuttle thing was way too complicated. They'd say, look, neurons have their own transporters to grab glucose, and brain scans show glucose going to neuron-heavy areas. But the shuttle proponents fired back, saying, yeah, sure, but those transporters are just for baseline needs, and your brain scans aren't sharp enough to tell the difference between a neuron and the astrocyte wrapped around it. The whole debate shifted, dramatically, when new biosensor technology was invented. For the very first time, scientists could actually measure lactate levels inside individual living cells in real time. And what they found was the smoking gun. The concentration of lactate is always higher inside astrocytes than inside neurons. And since basic physics tells us things only flow from high concentration to low, this was proof. It could only be flowing from astrocytes to neurons. So where did all this finally land? Well, this discovery led to what we now call metabolic flexibility. And it turns out both sides of the debate were a little bit right. Neurons can and do use glucose, especially when they're just idling at rest. But when the brain kicks into high gear, when you're really thinking hard or learning something new, that's when they rely on the lactate shuttle from astrocytes for a critical turbo boost. Okay, so why does any of this intricate cellular stuff actually matter to you? Well, as we're about to see, the implications are absolutely huge, touching everything from how we form memories to how we might one day treat some truly devastating brain diseases. Okay, get this. This isn't just some abstract science. It is fundamental to who you are. In a landmark study back in 2011, researchers found that if you block this lactate shuttle in rats, they become completely unable to form long-term memories. And the crazy part? Giving them extra glucose didn't help at all. But injecting lactate directly? That worked. Memory at its very core needs this specific fuel delivery system to function. And it turns out lactate is playing a double role here. We now know it's much more than just fuel. It also acts as a key signaling molecule, some even call it a lacthormone, that actively helps to forge and strengthen the very synaptic connections that represent a memory. It even helps turn on the specific genes needed to make that memory stick around for good. So if this partnership is so important, what happens when it breaks down? Well, the consequences are catastrophic. We're now starting to see that a failure in this shuttle is a core problem in some of our most devastating diseases. In Alzheimer's, for example, astrocytes become insulin resistant and just can't make enough lactate, which basically starves the neurons. In ALS, the support cells for motor neurons fail to supply them with lactate, which leads to paralysis. And all of this leaves us with a really provocative and, maybe even a hopeful final thought. For decades, we've tried to treat these diseases by focusing only on the neuron, the factory. But what if the key isn't the factory, but the power plant? Could developing new therapies that are aimed at refueling and restoring the astrocyte be the real key to saving the neuron and protecting the mind itself?